Hello, I'm Beth Finch, and this is Stan Godwin. We are at the Brewster Ladies Library, and this is September 19th, 2024. And we'd like to talk to Stan about some of his memories of West Brewster and what it was like when he was living here as a child, and then later as an adult. So, Stan, your family didn't come from Cape Cod.
No. I was actually born in Winchester, uh, and my parents actually were both from Woburn originally.
So what brought them to the Cape?
Well, since my birth, anyways, and probably before that, we had been going to Wellfleet. My uncle, Earl, in Wellfleet, ran Cape Cod Realty and owned, like half the town at one point. So we had two houses there that we had used as summer homes, both of them that were not winter ready. And my mother decided she wanted to run a store. My brother and sister are 10 years older than I am. And so it was just me at that point, and she just decided it was time to do something. So they found the packet on Stony Brook Road,
And what year was this?
1964.
What's it called, the packet?
Because of the packet ships in the bay. Brad and Kay Clark started that business in 1905. It actually there are three major buildings on the property of the packet: the house, what we call the jelly house, and the barn. They started the store in the jelly house, and I didn't even know that until we moved back in 2006. That was true, but I found paint marks on the floor of the jelly house that matched cabinets that are now in the store. And I realized that they had started the store there. And then about 1932, I think we discovered they added the front room to the barn because the barn had only been the tall part back. Now they added that front room and they moved the whole store in there. When my parents bought it, Kay Clark, who was still alive, Brad had died, uh, pointed out that this was the oldest continuously operating antiques and country store on Cape Cod at that time.
Was that because they started it?
That's presumably that's the deal
Right,
because Stony Brook used to kind of be 6A. At one point,
long
people
ago.
people came through Stony Brook rather than going around 6A type thing, and so the property, which as we found out, or we at least what it looks like, was originally a Sears home. Some one or more of the Sears people had the house there and then built the sheds,
Well,
barns.
you lead us to think that this house is very old. Do you have any idea of when?
1761 on the house, on the front part of the house, which is a standard cape, full cape. It was 1761, and then they added an extension out the back, which became the kitchen in early 1800s, and then they added an extension off the kitchen, which then became the laundry room and workshop and other areas about 1900. So all of that we think was added before Brad and Kate Clark bought the house. At least it sounded like that, but we have the records, like all the records on Cape Cod, all got smoked in the Barnstable or wherever it was at one year, and that was, we only discovered we were a Sears house when we found a old map at the Cape Cod Community College. And they had little markings about who lived where. Finally placed our house in position there and figured out it was Sears.
So Brad and Kate Clark had an antique store there?
Antique country.
And a country store.
Yeah, the front room was the country store, and that evolved into little knick-knacky kind of a things. But our most important selling item was penny candy.
I've heard that penny candy.
We during my mother's time, we were selling around 10,000 bags of penny candy a summer.
So you continued the penny
The
candy.
penny candy was continued.
So is penny
My,
candy an
my
antique?
teeth is a record of the penny candy continuing. Um, the front room remained country store, and then there were two rooms behind that, and then one room upstairs, and those were where the antiques were. And then we opened up where the cows lived underneath, and it was called the Whatnot Shop. Because we used to buy, like everybody in those days, we would go out and buy an estate. And so we would empty the houses. And all that stuff that, now ends up at the Brewster Swap Shop or something like that ended up in our Whatnot Shop. And it's incredible how much of that people would buy.
So you are not the only antique shop in Brewster.
No, I wish I could remember an exact number. I want to say there was like 30 antique stores plus in 1964 here
In this town.
in this town, from one end to the other. I mean, on our end of the town itself, we had the Packet, we had Hillary House, we had Flocks. Uh, and then there was that just before it became a liquor store. At the end of Stony Brook Road on 6A, there's this little tiny building on the right where C Street used to go across into Dennis there. And originally it started as a little antique store, and then it got converted to a liquor store. And then it came back just before we left. It came back to being an antique store again over there. Most of them were in, middle to East Brewster, um, and they went all the way to the line. I guess probably, I don't know, Bill Baxter probably was probably the farthest one that way.
Mhm.
That had an antique store in those days.
So do you work in the store at
all the time.
all the time?
Yeah, there was this kind of understanding that the boy worked in the store. Uh, Most of the time, I was behind the candy counter. I'll admit, because it was just handy until my mother hired Ellie Bogardus, who lived down by the grist mill, because we became close friends with them because Boogie, who was what they kind of, I don't even know Mr. Bogardus' first name, everybody called him Boogie, he was our furniture refinisher. So, we'd get a nice piece of furniture, bring it to Bogey, he'd fix it, and then Ellie, she was looking for something to do, so Mom hired her to.
So candy, I think of candy with children.
We're
Are
talking.
there that many children around?
Well, yeah, I mean, in those days, we had a lot of kids,
Even
in
in
and
this
around,
Brewster?
but it wasn't so much our children, so much as the children of the people that came here just to get the candy, because it was true penny candy. Down $1, you got 100 pieces of candy. I mean, that's the way it was there, and it wasn't just tourists, and it wasn't just people that lived here. We also had what was it called? Mitten Camp Mitten, Camp Mitten, which was, everybody thought it was a bad boys camp, but it really wasn't a bad boys camp so much as it was an inner city camp for boys. So all these
So
kids from Boston, who never got out of the city at all, somehow got down here, and it was up by Slough Pond, and they used to walk then from Slough Pond through the fire road. There's one right at the end of Red Top. If you go down Red Top and go straight across Tucket, you hit what was a fire road, which goes all the way out to Slough Pond.
it's blocked now.
Yeah,
You know the
yeah. But they would march them, in groups of only 20, with two um, guys, one on the front, one on the back, and they would all come to the store, and they would make them sit outside along the edge of the road, not in the road, but on the edge of the road, and one at a time they came in with their quarter, and it was always
5 pieces.
25 pieces. That was what they were allowed to get, and then the guy who was in charge, he stood at the door. And he would make sure they kind of moved along because, every now and then one would get in there and they'd just be so blown away by the candy taste they just couldn't pick. It was tough, and they were like, all right, let's go, let's get this done. And the really funny thing about that, though, and I'm going to segue here just a little bit, when we moved back in 2006, we didn't reopen the store until 2011. We kind of were trying to figure out what we wanted to do there. We weren't really sure that was what we wanted to do. Well, I'm sitting in my office, which is the parlor of the house one day, and you can see out to the driveway in the front of the store, and this big truck pulls in. And these two huge guys jump out of this truck, and they're just kind of looking around, and they walk up on the front porch of the store, and I can see them looking through the window, going in like that. So I'm curious now. So I walked out there and can I help you guys? One guy looks at me and goes, is this the place that used to have the candy? And I said, yeah. And, I remember we shook hands and he met him. And one of them was a, master electrician and the other one was a master plumber. And they were both from like Chelsea. And they had attended camp as kids. And they, just decided to drive down to see some of the areas that they remembered. And they remembered coming to the packet and getting penny
That
candy.
is
It's,
wonderful.
it's cool, actually. In fact, I took them in, we still had the candy counter there. With, of course, no candy, but it was a big glass case. And they go, oh, yeah, that's it. They were pretty excited about it. It was kind of neat, And,
Well, this makes the Packet a real center of the neighborhood, but there was a lot going on in that neighborhood as you were growing up. And how old were you when your folks moved here?
goes. I was 11.
Okay,
I was going into the sixth grade.
okay.
In fact, I did six, seven, and eight, at the town hall, which was
Yes.
then, of course, school, with faith, actually. Uh, and when I first got there, it wasn't a heck of a lot for me to do. Uh, to be honest, my mother and my father were trying to get the house situated, and of course, we had a house we had come from Winchester, and that furniture was not appropriate, because it was a split level ranch up there, and so they were finding furniture and things like that, and then putting things together that way. And Mom was going to, just trying to get herself together on the store. Um, so I had my bike, the standard 1964's, Stingray banana seat with the big thing, and I just started frankly driving around and meeting neighbors. Um, I just started knocking on doors.
Did you really?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I may have been a little ADHD in those days,
But friendly.
Well, I wanted to see if there were any kids near me.
Yeah.
Uh, so I started next door with Conrad Aiken, who just happened to be the Sword Laureate of the United States, which, meant nothing to me. And I met Conrad and Mary, and Conrad was nice, but typically, he liked his drink. Earlier in the day, and I remember my parents liked theirs. But Mary was very friendly and always had a glass of milk or something like that. But Conrad and I became kind of friends. To the extent his writing room was on the second floor on our side of his house. There's a set of stairs on the outside that go up there. You can get there from the inside, but oftentimes you could come out the front door and then walk around and up the stairs. And so I started going up there, and sometimes I'd be sitting up there and we'd be talking while he was writing. In fact, I'll guarantee you in that room there's still a bust of Conrad Aiken sitting in the window.
There is.
Has always been there. Because I know Liz and Diana, when they were living there, they kept
People on
the
the
Colorage, yeah, they kept it as a museum. I mean, virtually all the furniture and all the paintings and everything are exactly like the Aikens had it.
So your friendly picture of Conrad Aiken is not the usual one I hear.
Well, he was aloof, but then I called these people in that end of the town. They were sort of the intelligentsia because it wasn't just Conrad Aiken. Uh,
And Mary was an artist. So she
Yes,
was
right. But she did most of her, but she did most of her art elsewhere when they were on vacations and things like that. She didn't really do it there at the house. But like John Hay, of course, is right around the corner. Well, John Hay is kind of there because Conrad was there. And John was not an easy person to know because he just had too much going on in his head all the time. He was just always kind of he'd be like when we were at the Museum of Natural History. He'd be teaching a class, let's say, like out on the seashore. We'd walk out on Riggs Island or something like that, and sometimes he you could see him kind of drift away for a few seconds, because some thought came to his mind, which I'm sure was something, he wanted to write down, as part of the books, and stuff like that. He was just, He was just that kind of a guy. But he was pro Brewster, and he was pro the Museum of Natural History. I mean, he really that was really kind of his baby there, and all his books kind of prove that if you
So
read it.
John was a no nature writer,
Absolutely,
but he was one of the founders of the Museum of
yes, it
Natural
was
History.
right. And when we got here, they were just hiring their first curator, full time curator, and this was a man named Marshall T. Case.
Now, was the building there?
All we had was the summer pavilion, the little A-frame that's on the right as you look at it from the front there.
Yep.
When I started volunteering down there, I mean, literally, I started spending all my time down there because I got to know Marshall, and there was a bunch of us kids that they called the junior naturalists of the day from all over this town, and a lot of summer kids that only came down here for the whole summers that were there. I mean, at different times there were dozens of us in and out of there, but there was only a few of us that were there all the time. I
Do
mean,
you remember any of the others who were local children who were there?
Jerry Howes was there, Jonathan Smith was there. Um, you think here,
Were the Dugans there when you were there?
Dion Dugan was there, and there's a book that Marshall wrote. It's called "Look What I Found." I'm sure it's here in the library. Almost every kid that ever worked there is pictured somewhere in that book, except for his razor brother, me. And, and in fact, Marshall came to stay with us for a weekend while we were living. Came back to Packet, and he left. He brought a copy of that book with him. And I said, "Well, you know, Marshall, it's funny. I was just down at the swap shop of all places at the dump, and I found that book. So of course, I took it. And I got home and I went through the whole book, and I said, "Do you know there's not one picture in there of me?" And he goes, "I don't even know how that's possible." He says, "Well, I don't." You know, there was kind of a joke between the two of us that I wasn't in his book, but Jerry's in there and Jonathan's in there, and John Hayes in there, and I mean, there's a lot of different people that are in there.
So what were you doing at the museum?
Everything. When I started, we cleaned tanks. We
So when it started, it had tanks of
inside the
tin exhibit.
right inside the summer pavilion. And it was called that simply because once the weather got bad, we put up the boards, and that was it. There was no way to keep it. There was no heat or anything like that in there. We had a bunch of different aquaria. Um, and we would go around at the beginning of every season. We went around and we would collect, amphibians and snakes and whatever else we could get. The biggest thing we did was go up. We would head across towards the Beech Tree Forest Trail on the south side, and which we kind of built in those days. And
Really,
we would jump it.
did you help build that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It was slavery. That's what it But we would jump off the bridge into the Stony Brook, and we would, find some large snapping turtle because we had a little area for just a large snapping turtle. Sometimes the snapping turtle was, 50, 60 pounds. It would take more than one of us to get it back to the museum.
Snapping turtle.
Oh yeah, if you didn't really know what you were doing, you'd walk right into it because they lived under the water right there along the Stony Brook in that area. Because that was pretty much fresh water at that point. It didn't even hardly ever get brackish, and part of that problem, of course, was originally that little tiny culvert under 6A. It just didn't bring the salt water until they finally, redid that whole area.
So you were a gatherer, a researcher?
Yeah, and we fed the animals. We had horned owls, we had skunks, we had raccoons, we had foxes.
Cages.
Yes, but they were decent.
I see.
All right. And we had, and they were in the cages. If as you were looking at the pavilion, the cages kind of went towards the left, towards where the hill is, where we eventually built the permanent building.
It started out as a museum focused primarily on young people.
Yes, that was what I understood it to be. But when I started working there, we just got family after family. They just came in there, and we had a little loop trail right there at the summer pavilion that went down or down the if you go across the causeway there, if you look to the right, there's a big rock. And that trail went down to that rock, and everybody could go down to the rock, and they could look in the water and see low tide and high tide, kind of thing. And of course, we had the trail out to the Williams Island as well, which we had the responsibility of keeping open. Though I never, we always thought the museum owned that, but apparently not. But we took care of it. And in those days, we didn't even have wood walkways across, the wood on the top of the peak going across there. It was after high tide, it was mud, and so we tried to get people to do it at low tide when it dried out a little bit. But take care. I mean, it was that beach out there on the other side of Wind Island pretty much became our private beach because people were not willing to walk that far to get to the beach. Remember Paynes Creek at that time? It had a big parking lot.
Yeah,
You could put 30 cars down there then in those days.
yeah.
And so everybody went there.
So did the museum have tours? Did it have programs?
Constant. That was what Marshall started. We started having classes. We had seashore life, we had pond life, we had bird thing, which is something that I started getting farther and farther into. I mean, it was while I was at the museum that I really felt I was going to become an ornithologist. That's where I was going with my life here. Though I was mostly a handyman, if you will. I mean, I was in charge of making sure everything worked, and I eventually became the only junior naturalist that was given a full time staff job while I was in high school, and they actually got paid for being there.
So there was a group of young people called junior naturalists.
Right.
And they were paid to work as well as
Yeah, they helped. They helped, keep everything up and feed the animals and stuff like that.
So you started when you were 11.
I believe I found Marshall that first fall that I was here. Time is
Sure.
elusive, as they say, but I'm almost positive I ran into him, and we just hit it off. I mean, Marshall was and still is, he's still alive, an extraordinary guy who was just all about this museum because this was his first job out of Cornell. He had just gotten all his degrees, and now all of a sudden, he's been given this real opportunity to work with John Hay, which was, of course, important at that time, and other people, in this area. And, we had licenses to collect stuff from just about anywhere we wanted to. So we would go get blue crabs, and we'd go get lobsters, and we'd go get this and stuff like that. And so we weren't situated exactly right here, but I will admit we did the bulk of our stuff in and around Brewster because that just seemed appropriate to what we were doing. But we'd have to go down to Wellfleet to get like a diamondback, a terrapin, because they were in those days they weren't quite as almost as extinct as they are now. But we would get them, we would get a pair, and then we would show them for the summer, and then at the end of the summer we'd take them back.
So you took,
Everything got put back where we found them, except the ones that had been, skunks. We kept through the winter. We fed them through the winter because they were descended and they had no way to protect themselves. And the fox changed because the original one we had was there because it had been injured, and and then we let it go, and then the raccoons, you know, if you didn't let them go, they'd let themselves go, so it just didn't matter. I mean,
so who took
they uh, I went in there and fed them. I mean, they didn't hurt you, and they knew it.
through the winter?
We were there all year long, making sure anything that had to be done was done.
Was there something?
Marsh would do little lectures and things like that, but most of the winter was like, let's see if we can make some money to help pay this because I don't know what it costs to go see the museum. It's like maybe I don't know, a couple of bucks per family or something. I mean, they didn't charge anything. I mean, that was part of John's. whole thing was, let's not make it so expensive nobody will want to go. Um, and it didn't really start going up in price, frankly, until we built the winter quarters. Um, and that was job was completely done by almost all volunteers. We hired two gentlemen, parents, uh, Don Senior and Don Junior. Don Senior was a great elderly man that was a wonderful builder. I mean, he just understood fine carpentry.
You know what I'm saying?
Perham, I think Perham, I believe is how it was spelled. Perham, something like that. I'm pretty sure it's Perham. But the son, Don Jr., this guy's crazy. I mean, he lived in his Volkswagen Bug and mainly subsisted, from what we could tell, on his banana splits. That's all he ever seemed to eat. And his teeth were bad, and he was kind of wild, but he just loved that museum.
And he was a good carpenter.
He was a good carpenter. We laid the foundation for that. I believe it was either late October or early November. I can't remember the year, but I'm sure it's building up there, someplace. And we started late in the afternoon. It was starting to get dark when we started, and we'd already, um, you know, the foundation had been dug and all the forms had been put up. And of course, in those days, the forms were a horror story. It took days just to build the forms. They weren't like pre-mades like they use today. And my job during the whole process of pouring the cement is I crawled around across the top, walking across the top of the forms with that big air pocket vibrating thing. It was like a huge snake. Did this all night long with, because your job was to get the air bubbles out of the cement while they were pouring it. People laughed at me. I don't know why, but I did that, and in those days I had no fear of falling or that kind of stuff. I mean, it was easy to walk all around, and I had to go around in circles all night long while we did
Did you
this.
really?
That's exactly what
Like, how old were you then?
I don't know. I had my license. So I was probably 16 or 17.
So you were really old enough to know better.
I guess. I thought it was fun. We'll give the parents one thing. I mean, they taught me almost everything I know about carpentry, because it took us months to build that building. Uh, I mean, literally months, because it was them showing us what to do that day. I mean, I did insulation. I, the worst job I had was building the dark room. Down in the basement, because I had to go in there and I had to lay we were using Formica countertops, so they sent me into this little enclosed room with no ventilation at all, and I'm laying out Formica glue, and laying down this Formica, and I came out of there and I could remember Marshall looking at me going, we really should get you some fresh air. I was high as a kite, from being inside down there. But we had the dark room, and then at the same time, we painted it. All us, well, kids, because we're older now, we're teenagers. We did all the painting, and we learned to sheetrock there. I learned to shingle there, and if you walk into the main auditorium of that building there, where they teach the classes and things like that, you'll see that there are some purplish beams going across the top. And if you look at them closely, you'll realize that all those beams, not only were they stained with this purple stuff, but they were all hand sanded to give them a little distress look. Well, who gets elected to go up the ladder and straddle a beam, and sand the beams back and forth? And then, of course, and every time I did that, some pleasant person would come in and take the ladder away, yeah. And then, and I was sitting there and like,
You never wanted to become a carpenter after that.
no, I mean, I have to admit, and my wife will attest to it. I've used those skills that I learned there in carpentry my whole life.
Yeah.
Besides, what was the name at Brewster Elementary? The
The shop.
shop teacher. Uh,
Brewster Elementary had a shop teacher.
it was the best class I was ever in. I'll have to admit, I loved shop, and
Yours just went out through what? Eighth grade.
Yes. Yeah, we had sixth, seventh, and eighth grade had shop for boys, and they had homemaking, for girls.
Well,
And they
that's
were they were kind of attached in the rooms. You could open the doors and see each other. You know, but the boys used to get in trouble. Looking at the girls. When they were over there, and somebody who was it? It was David Crocker's mother that gave me one day about something. Well, I can't remember what it was, but it's a great place. And that
so tell me, how old were you when you finally stopped being a worker
the museum.
at the museum?
My
Now
I'm gonna say my junior year of no, it was probably my sophomore, because sophomore year we went to the Bahamas for the museum. Um,
so
I
you
think
didn't go to high school on the Cape. You went.
I did 1 year of high school on the Cape,
Okay.
and again, it just classes up until that point, even in Winchester, and then here, they weren't demanding enough of my attention span. And I went to my parents and I actually told them, I said, look, I'm just not sure I'm getting as much out of here as I should be getting out of here. Uh, and so we started looking at schools. Tabor came up, and that's when I ended up going to
So you
Tabor.
went to Tabor for most of high school.
I was a boarder. They actually no for all of it because they made me take my freshman year over again.
Come back to the museum in the summer.
Yes, I was still working. My freshman year, I worked at the museum for the whole summer. In fact, I had a contract for the summer. And I will admit, about three-quarters of the way through the summer, I got into a little bit of a tiff with Ruth Walters. Isn't that what her name was? Ruth Walters, I'm pretty sure. Ruth Walters. Uh, she was actually, quote, during the time Arthur was gone, had been gone. They hadn't found anybody new, and she was kind of coordinating all of it. Well, my job was really outside. I took care of grounds and animals and stuff like that. And I don't even know what the argument was about, but she decided that she just didn't need me anymore. I said, okay. I said, I'll come by next week and get the rest of my check. And she like, well, pay me. I said, well, I was guaranteed $1,500 for the summer. Uh, you know, I'll just come back again next week. She's like, no. She didn't know that. So I came back and got it. And, at that point, I just found work. In fact, right after that, I started working for Elbridge over at Dennis. Robert Sr. came in and I was doing all the packing for my mother for shipping because apparently I had a knack for making sure things didn't break when they were being shipped. And Robert Eldred came in and asked my mother, I said, no, do you think Stan would like to come and work for us over here at the company? And, she was like, yes, Stan needs a job, you know. And so I started driving down to Eldred's and working all the auctions out there.
Well, I want to go back a little bit. Tell me about the neighborhood where you grew up, because you mentioned that there were some interesting people there besides Conrad and
Right.
Mary.
Conrad was next door to us. And if I went the other direction, the first person I met was Betty Lane. And Betty Lane was one of the founders of the Cape Cod Museum of Art at one point. She was just an artist of her own. Her house is still there. Pat go by now? O'Brien lives there at this point. But Betty Lane, was kind of a semi-reclusive artist that did her own thing there. But once a year, she would call my mother, when it was beach plum time. Because right across the street from Betty Lane's house, there was a field there, this really great, massive beach plum bush. And every time the beach plums were gone, she'd call my mother and say, will you send Stanley down? And I'd have to get out there and pick beach plums all day long.
Pick them.
Oh no, she came picking all. This was a big bush. I mean, we were picking gallons of beach plums on good years. Uh, but that's also the place that I stepped into a ground yellow jacket. One year. That was good. I only got hit 20, 26 times, before I could get my leg on the paddle. But I still went back the next year as well. We were careful.
So there were some other people around too.
Well, John Hay, of course, and I met John and Christy because I knew Charlie. Uh, Charlie and I, we were the two out of the three last people off of what was his name, Mr. Garfield, Mr. Garfield's bus. Uh, that's when he's not doing the bus; he was driving like a garbage truck or something like that, right? And and so when the bus came down, it came down 6A. It would swoop back up and it would let off Charlie, and then it would go to my house at the beginning of Red Tube, and then it would let me off at my house, and then it took off for Perry out of Slough Pond. What was his first name?
Perry.
Perry Kid. Kind of a tall, skinny guy, red, short hair, but he lived right on Slough Pond. Can't remember his, but he was the last guy on the bus. Um, and in the morning, of course, he came and picked up Charlie, and then picked up me, and then we had to go all the way out to Slough Pond, and then we'd finally get to school. Uh, after that,
What time did the bus come?
that's a pretty good question, but in those days,
I only ask because when my kids might have came like at 6:30,
yeah,
it's dark, they go out with flashlights.
but they had to go all the way to probably Orleans, right?
Yeah,
Because we only had to go here in those days. And but my mother could sit at the kitchen table at our house, and in those days, not only could we see the bay from our house, she could look down the Stony Brook Valley and see the corner of Percy Newcomb and 6A. And so she would sit there having her coffee, and she would tell me when she saw the bus. And and she was ready. Yes, he went down on school. And because I'd be upstairs getting dressed or whatever, and she'd go, "Okay, there's the bus." And by the time I came downstairs, grabbed my books or whatever, and a lunch. Well, we didn't have lunch bags because we had a cafeteria for what it was worth at the Brewster Elementary, and we would. I'd get out front, go stand out in the front of the porch of the store.
so who else was around in the neighborhood? Your parents went to or had parties with some of the adults.
Oh, everybody. Um, they have a, there's a lot of Friday night and Saturday night, cocktail parties that started at promptly at 5, because it's like a federal law. And of course, the Aikens would come over, and occasionally the Hayes would show up, but not as often. But it was mostly starting on the west end in Treffrey's, where just as you were getting ready to go off the Stony Brook back onto 6A, and across the street from them, where Pat Feinstein lives now, there was a lawyer that lived there, and I can't remember their names, but oftentimes the party was at that house, and sometimes it was at our house, and sometimes it was at Bouchard's down there. And usually, when it was at Bouchard's, they always had a little stage in the back set up that had like a live band of some sort or musicians of either single or more than one, kind of a thing, and down through there. And the other people sometimes joined, but they weren't part of that so-called intelligentsia group that did things. I mean, we even had um, another person that came to our area was up on Setauket was Eugene Fitsch. Is that his name? Yeah. Eugene Fitsch, of course, he was a set designer on Broadway back in the 30s. And he came to that area mainly because Aiken was there and because he found out John Hay was there, and then everybody knew Bouchard, who was a photographer, was up there at the same time. But everybody, of course, there was at least 1/10 of the amount of houses then, so there weren't as many people.
Gibbs.
I mean, right, because I
Do you know the Gibbses? Aaron Gibbs, Peggy.
no, for some reason or other, but I knew the Drakes,
Yeah.
and the Drakes lived on Stony Brook, but his mother lived down at the end of Red Tube, just before you hit the thing, and I can remember taking stuff from their house down to her house for her, going down Red Top, and in those days Red Top wasn't very hard; it was very soft sand road. It was exciting on a bike, and across from the Drakes at what is now 400, the Smythes, Mr. and Mrs. Smythe lived way in the back there. They had a pretty good piece of land there. Um, and when I went back there and knocked on their door, Mrs. Smythe came to the door, and she was a lovely woman, and she was like, "Who are you?" I said, "Well, Stan Godwin, just bought the packet, and I'm just trying to see if there's any kids here." "Well, there's no kids here, but there is my husband." And Mr. Smythe comes out, and he's in a wheelchair, and he goes, he says, "Do you know how to play chess?" And I go, "No, sir, I've never played chess." He said, "Well, we're going to learn." And he taught me how to play chess. And that was. So I was going down to his house every week or every 2 weeks, and we'd have a game of chess, which, of course, he loved. And I liked it. It was fun. And then as I went a little farther down, of course, all the Gages lived at the corner. And then after that, with the Ramseys. And after that, it was pretty wide open. There was the old guy, I think his name was Kerrigan, that had where the realtor lady lives now. Um,
You didn't know Harry Alexander.
no, Harry Alexander. Yeah, he lived on the right in the house there. Well, we got to know him because he had an old Model A in his garage. My father liked old cars, and so we went down there one day and we just, we went in and met Harry. And then I made it down to the gristmill, and of course, became very close friends with Woody, Harry. Didn't really know Dana at all at that time, but unbeknownst to me, Dana was really probably in Vietnam at that time because he was in the Marines, and that's probably why I never really spent much time with him until I came back to the working at the gristmill. Also, we were all very close to that organization there.
Well, go back up for just 1 minute
Okay.
because before we started this, you were telling me about some of these parties where the grown-ups would be there, but the kids would be there too.
Yeah, almost all of the parties, the kids would come with grown-ups, but we had our own thing outside. Um,
Wherever it was, there
yeah,
was.
wherever it happened to be, you just played outside, and until it was time for people to go home, kind of thing. Because a lot of times you were walking. If it was closed, you didn't have to drive to all these places. And of course, in those days, there was absolutely no light on Stony Brook Road. There wasn't a street light from the blinking light all the way to the end of the road. It was wild. In fact, our store got robbed one year. I was at Tabor. My parents were down in Florida, and they got a phone call from probably Saban, who was the only policeman around who protected and saved every kid in this town. Nobody should ever say anything bad about Saban. He never told your parents anything you did, and he always made sure you didn't get in trouble. He was a great man. But Saban or somebody called them and said, "Hey, we found Stan's car out on Airline Road." And they're like, "What?" Because I left it in the driveway. You couldn't have your car at Tabor. And my dad calls me up and he says, "Well, they found your car out on Airline Road. When we got home, found out we'd been robbed." So, all right. And I'm like, "Well, Dad, how'd they get my car out to Airline Road? I left it empty, at the house. I didn't have any gas." And he said, "Well, I filled it up for you." And but what they did is they broke into the house. They got the keys. They took stuff out of the house, some very funny things that my mother had stored away out there, and went out to the store and took some stuff out of the store. But the most important things they took were right at the front of the store. We had two, 1700s hitching posts, metal hitching posts for horses. They were beautiful, just horse heads on a post kind of thing. Took both of those. Well, 1 month after that, we had a street light, which is there to this day. And when we moved back in 2006, we were still paying what, $10 a month? $10 a month for the electricity for that streetlight because it belongs to the packet, not to the town. And my parents paid that bill from, that would have been 1970, maybe 1970-ish. All right, because I was a Tabor from 68 to 72. And they paid that bill right up until my mother died. And then when we took over the house, we continued the bill. And I don't know if the new owners are paying that bill now or not.
Stan, this is so much fun. I could listen to you forever, but we're going to run out of time.
Okay.
Is there anything in particular you'd like to tell us that we really should know?
Brewster was for me, Brewster was a wonderful place to grow up. There's no question about that. And I really feel like this is where I grew up. And because you could ride your bike anywhere, you could do anything. We would, and we rode our bikes from one end of it to the other. I mean, my closest friend was really Matt Nickerson, and he's on the other side of town, closer to where Faith lives, kind of thing. And going down there to his house, the La Salette was still in activity then, so you could go over and talk to the brothers, and stuff like that, and get down and watch them, pick apart, animals underneath there, that they were going to be eating. And, we used to play in the windmill, which is now, of course, the German boy. I mean, that was just like a clubhouse for us, in those days. All the kids knew all the kids, no matter what grade you were in, because there were so few of us.
How many people do you think? How many kids were in your class, do you think?
I don't know how many kids were here, but we only had like what 1,300 permanent residents in those days in this town or something like that. And and a lot of them didn't have had older kids. They didn't get but in our classes. I mean, there was 15, 20 maybe.
I think like 20.
Yeah, yeah, something like that. I mean, it was very few, and a lot kind of were in and out there. They'd come in for a couple of years, and then all of a sudden you realize they're gone. Like the Crocker, the Crockers and the Bassetts and the Ellises and the kids of those families. There was a lot of us, and we were just, we lasted throughout the whole thing. I mean, and to this day, I still, when we came back, I mean, with Faith and all her family, and I knew, David Crocker, and we'd go up there and, just talk about old days and the Allards, brothers. In fact, one of the Allards, part of our, septic, when that came up, uh, and it was just fun. We'd all meet at like Breakwater because it had a diving out there. Remember that floating dock out there? But then after we'd be at Breakwater, everybody get on their bikes and we'd all ride up to Sheep Pond so we could wash the salt off. And then I'd get on Great Fields and take that, back home
That was a challenge.
on a bike extraordinarily. Yeah, but they had horses out there, so it was kind of and
Well, just maybe to jog your memory, if you need any, was there any one event, national, local, that you really remember? Something, like parents perhaps remember Pearl Harbor. We remember when Kennedy was shot.
well, Kennedy was shot when I was in Winchester. Uh,
But anything while you were in Brewster that just, it could even be something local that you just say, oh yeah, I remember that time. Not
I don't
particular.
know. Anything stand out? Do you think of anything that stands out to?
For me, the one thing was when Skip Daly died.
I don't know. See, now I didn't really know Skip Daly.
Right.
So I mean, I did have fun though watching Don Kent ice boat down in Long Pond though. That was kind of fun. Bring us with TV and yeah, out there on. you know, uh, I mean, my whole life revolved around the museum. For me, to be honest, it really did. I got off the bus there, every day, every night. After it was dark, Marshall drove me home, and my mother, always said, "And there's a plate in the fridge." I'm like, what are you gonna get? But but I think my parents were happy that that's what I got into. Yeah. And it was because of that I went into tourism and left the ornithology field. And it was a whole change in my life going into photography because of a trip we took with the museum one year down to the Bahamas, and it it made the direction of my life from there on. Because as soon as I came out of high school, I went to Rochester Institute of Technology, which was a photo school. I got my BFA there, and my last year there, I took a job at this school I never heard of called East Texas State University in Commerce, Texas, which is like the worst college town you've ever been in. I mean, it had nothing. It just had the college. And everybody that lived in town pretty much worked at the college because that's all there was. But I spent 30 years at that college and worked my way up from a professional staff position to being head of the art department. In fact, I think I probably am to this day the only MS, master's degree person that ever became a head of the department on that campus. But I thought was kind of interesting because I couldn't go back to that school today and get my job back, even though I have 30 years experience doing it.
Yeah.
They wouldn't hire me because I don't have the degree. Uh, Apparently it
This
makes
has
you
been,
smarter.
I can't tell you how much this has been. Thank you so much for being.
I appreciate doing it. I hope you got something out of it. Sometimes I wonder. I don't know. I don't know who says that.
I think we learned a lot.
Do we answer questions? You're welcome. Thank you.